Which wide receivers are going to help you win in week 13 of the fantasy football season? We're here to share our top starts and sits. Don't forget to click that subscribe button and the notification bell after this video is over so you can catch all the latest. All right, Chris, let's get right to it. Who's your first must start at wide receiver?
Yeah, I'm starting with Michael Thomas. We get a lot of questions about Michael Thomas on our live start sit show on Sunday mornings, which you guys should definitely tune into. So I'm telling you right now, if you have Michael Thomas, you start him this week, no doubt about it. When we saw the Saints play the Falcons a couple weeks ago in Taysom Hill's first start, he was obviously Taysom Hill's favorite target. Even last week when he barely threw the ball, he still targeted Michael Thomas. I think it was like 42% of the time. So he's looking his way early and often. And in that game I talked about against Atlanta, Michael Thomas had his best game of the season, 9 catches for 104 yards on 12 targets. I expect something similar. Get him in your lineup. Feel good about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that in a season full of busts and disappointments, Michael Thomas has been one of the biggest disappointments for fantasy owners, especially drafted him in the first round. A lot of times top 5 overall, just hasn't delivered. You might know that Will Fuller of Houston has been suspended basically the rest of the season, 6 games for violating the PED policy. What does that mean? That means Houston is very thin at wide receiver. Brandin Cooks really has no choice but to become a target hog. He's been a target hog in a few games already anyways, had some top 10 wide receiver fantasy finishes. Well, this isn't a great matchup with Indy, but honestly, do you not see Cooks getting at least 10 targets in this game? I mean, also besides Fuller being out, who was their top receiver, remember Randall Cobb is an IR, Kenny Stills was waived, and even when Fuller was in the lineup, he has been at least a top 40 fantasy wide receiver for 7 straight games in PPR leagues. Okay, so the floor keeps rising higher and higher. You have to keep Cooks in your lineup.
I agree. And you got to think against this Indy defense, they're not going to be able to run the ball. So it's going to be a lot of Deshaun Watson throwing. And Cooks is for sure going to be his number 1 target. And like you said, Kuti, definitely a good pickup as well. And the tight ends will probably have a decent amount of targets. But Cooks for sure is the guy to start in this offense. My next must start, I'm pretty sure I had this guy as a must start last week too, and I'm riding with him again. That's DeVante Parker. He had a huge game last week, 8 catches, 119 yards with Ryan Fitzpatrick under center. And it doesn't sound like Miami's in any real hurry to bring Tua back. So there's a chance he could not play again this week, and it could be Fitzpatrick again. But even if it is Tua, I still like Parker a lot. I talked about the difference he has when Preston Williams is out. Don't think Preston Williams is coming back. And get Cincinnati this week. That's a great matchup. So you can't go wrong with DeVante Parker. Roll him out there again.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned Parker a couple of times, and there's a reason. Again, Dolphins very thin. I can tell you this. Very thin at wide receiver. Parker is going to get targeted a ton. And again, Cincinnati going with their 3rd-string quarterback again. I feel pretty good about his chances. All right, and I'm going to go with actually a pair of players, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. Which one do you like better? Do you start him? Do you not start him? It was a bad matchup with San Francisco. Well, guess what? These are 2 players who you basically, even if you're not sure what you're getting each week, you just have to keep in your lineup. And this matchup isn't as bad. Arizona, okay, they're okay on defense against wide receivers. Nothing to be scared of. Patrick Peterson isn't the same as he used to be. But even so, we've seen that in negative matchups, Robert Woods will still get a ton of touches. Cooper Kupp always finds a way to come away with, a high amount of receptions. So I feel like both of these players are worth starting. But last year in both games against Arizona, both these receivers had big games. So hopefully that answers a lot of your questions ahead of time.
Yeah, you're right. These guys, don't try to decide between them. Just start them both, right? If you have one or the other, start them. If you have both of them, just start them both. It's fine. And then my final must start, Corey Davis is kind of going under the radar, I think. I don't think people realize how good he's been. Over the last 3 games since he came back from his injury, he's had at least 67 yards in each of those games. He topped 100 yards in one of those games. And we're talking about matchups against Indy, Baltimore, and Indy, right? So 3 of the toughest possible matchups. Now it gets Cleveland, who may not have Denzel Ward, and they already allow the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. And I know everybody, A.J. Brown's a beast, and he's an every week must start. But I think Corey Davis this week can be just as good. So I think this week, everything aligns for him. He breaks out and has a huge game.
Yeah, he's definitely gone under the radar. We mentioned DeVante Parker earlier. Corey Davis is basically this year's DeVante Parker. And then my final must start for this week, but Diontae Johnson, still a target hog. 8 catches on 13 targets. Not a ton of yardage. That was just kind of a weird game, weird situation, but it doesn't matter. Johnson is absolutely crushing. I mean, top 10 receiver for me going into this week. You might look at the matchup coming up and say, well, Washington has actually been pretty tough in general as a pass defense, but not so much lately. The last 3 weeks, Washington is allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. Okay, so not sure what the reason is, but Washington letting down in the secondary. Johnson has a really good chance to be a wide receiver 1 this coming week.
Yeah, every week he's plays, you have to start him. Had some drops today, but it seemed like a lot of the guys had drops today. Maybe there's something with the weather, with the ball. Don't expect that again. Diontae Johnson must start, even in what may look like a tough matchup, but really isn't that tough of a matchup.
All right, let's go to the must sits. Who are we going to avoid this week at wide receiver? Go ahead. Who you got?
Yeah, this one's painful. It's Tyler Boyd. This is another situation where it's just QB play is so bad you can't trust him. I said last week, bench him, see what happens. Well, we saw what happened. 6 targets, 3 catches, 15 yards. That cannot do it. And Miami, they're not a great defense, but they're also not a bad defense. They're good enough. And against Brandon Allen, they'll be more than good enough, actually. And Tyler Boyd just can't be trusted in any fantasy lineups whatsoever. I know it hurts because he was probably your every week wide receiver 2 that you didn't have to worry about. But at this point, he's got to be on your bench.
Yeah, and I know it hurts you because, you've been a pretty staunch Boyd fan supporter last couple of years, rightly so. But yeah, you just can't start really any Bengals receiver. I'm also going to avoid, not surprisingly, a Jets player, but not the one you might think. It's Jamison Crowder, who we thought was the safe player. Not so much anymore. With Darnold back, it didn't matter. Crowder only 3 catches, 31 yards. And so here's the thing. The switch now, it's not about the quarterback. It's about the play calling. So they're intentionally not targeting the slot as much. They're trying to stretch the field. Didn't result really in any touchdowns last week, but still, the point is that Crowder can't be trusted. And the Raiders are actually doing much better against slot receivers lately than they had been early in the year. So not even a great cornerback matchup for him with LaMarcus Joyner. So if you're entertaining thoughts of Crowder as a safe play, forget it.
Yeah, I really thought with Darnold back last week, Crowder would get force-fed the ball. It was nice early in the season, but I think it's over now. Time to keep him on the bench. And then this is kind of a similar guy to Crowder, but instead of the short passes, the deep passes, and that's Christian Kirk. He hasn't topped 50 yards over the last 3 games. And I know Murray hurt his shoulder, 2 weeks ago, so that no excuse for that first game in those 3 games. But I really do think Murray's shoulder is not 100%, and it's affecting him, especially on the deep balls. So we're just not seeing Christian Kirk getting those deep passes. And now gets the Rams. That secondary is as good as it gets. And, oh, by the way, for a guy who you expect the deep pass from, the Rams are giving up the fewest yards per reception in the NFL. Not good for Christian Kirk. Keep him on your bench this week.
Yeah, and Kirk's the guy I'm always probably too high on. He disappointed me a couple of times, especially in that matchup with Seattle. Just can't do it. And I'm also not starting a guy who is a little more boom bust, but in a negative matchup with the Patriots, I'm avoiding Mike Williams. I'm actually a little sketchy on the whole passing game. Talk about that more on the quarterback episode, but Mike Williams let down last week, and it's not even just about the matchup, but if you noticed, with Austin Eckler back, this offense kind of shifted philosophy. Instead of bombing away, right, and letting Herbert do his thing, all of a sudden we see the dump offs, right? And it's becoming more conservative. I'm worried that might affect Williams the most. We know that Keenan Allen probably won't get affected ever because he's an elite wide receiver and he's going to be all across the field. But with Williams already being boom bust and a bad matchup, and the worry that I have about this offense maybe becoming more conservative, I can't do it. Williams is a no-go for me.
Yeah, I actually tweeted out about this. Justin Herbert at one point his average or his yards per attempt was like barely over 5 in this game because he just kept dumping the ball off to Austin Eckler. And I know we love it for fantasy if you have Austin Eckler, but not good for the Chargers offense to just be dumping it off to a guy 16 times. So certainly concerned for Mike Williams. And in this matchup, I think it's better just to avoid him.
There you go. Might be other players at wide receiver or other positions you have questions about. We are live 2 hours before kickoff every Sunday, so you can ask your questions there. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at Endgame Fantasy, or leave us a comment right here, and we'll try to get to all your questions. Thanks for watching, and good luck in Week 13.